Right, so as I said, first out is Karin Håkansson from Sweden. Now, Karin is a senior data leader with a burning interest in data mesh. She's also the founder at Trustic Consulting, and she was selected as one of HypeRight's Nordic 100 list for people in the data analytics and AI sector. Now, please note that we welcome questions in the chat, and I will also try to answer the questions that you have written now later on, at the end of the conference. Now, but you can ask questions concerning, also regarding the presentations in the chat, and we will spend a few minutes at the end of the presentation of each presentation to discuss them. Right, so I'm very curious to learn more about data governance. So please take it away, Karin.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. I'll share my screen. Let's see. Okay. Let's put in presentation. Okay. All right. So today I will be talking about the governance or as it's also called, federated computational governance for data mesh. But before I dig into the subject, why is it not switching? There. Okay, before I just want to present myself. So who am I? I'm Karin Håkansson, and I'm the founder of Trustic Consulting, where I work. And I have a background as a software engineer, data engineer, project manager, agile coach, manager, and now lately I have gone into data governance. So, and I'm super passionate about the topic that we're going to talk about today, because this is in all those other goals, I always had problems with that kept on coming and it wasn't really solved. And then I went into data governance and I was like, here is the solution. I'm so excited. So happy to be here. If you want to connect with me, I'm on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect. And if you want to discuss anything about this topic, I'm happy to do that. All right, so the first question is, what is in it for me as a data scientist or anyone working within AI, basically? Why should you care about data governance? And what I want to show you today is how can data governance and data mesh make your life easier? Because I think it can. Let me show you how. So the agenda today, I will talk a little bit about why are we talking about data mesh and what do you actually need when we talk about data mesh. And then I will explain a little bit about data governance. What is it? And then we will dig into, okay, how does federated computational governance work? And then we will sum up, okay, how does this help me as a data scientist? All right. So where are we coming from and why are we talking about data mesh? And if you look back on how companies have organized themselves when it comes to data, I would say that in this first one here, where you talk about silos, this is probably how most companies started their data journey. You could see that sales have their sales system and they get the data from there and then they build the reports on top of that. And same for marketing, production, and any domain you have pretty much. And that works pretty fine because you don't have that many dependencies to anyone else. So you can, you work with your data and you're happy. The problem is that it's hard to share data between the different silos. What does it mean? How do you work? How can I access it? I mean, all these questions were, and it was really problematic because they didn't know how to compare the data also. So then a bright person said, let's put all the data in one place. So you move to like a centralized approach instead. And this is where we're talking about central data warehousing, data lakes, or any of those kind of topics. Okay, so you get all the source data in one place, and then you share it to everyone. And this is, I mean, it's a good approach, right? Because you collect the data and everyone look at the same data, and so you solve the problem with the first in silos with the problems that you have there. But if you imagine like a huge company, like really large companies, the demand for data is not decreasing, right? Right now, it's definitely increasing, and the demand on this poor little data team sitting there, trying to deliver on all the demands, and they really never catch up. So it becomes a bottleneck because everyone is supposed to get the data from there. So then pretty much data mesh enters, right? So in data mesh, how it works there is that you create these data products, and that's a core principle in data mesh. And what you do then is that you still have the domains defined, and they own the data products. But what you also do is that you can actually access it from wherever you want to access it. And everyone shares their data product with the rest of the organization. And this solves the previous problems that you have if you are able to implement it. Because I want to comment on this. I mean, data mesh is now, I mean, it was invented by this woman called Shamak Dghani, who wrote a brilliant book on the topic. So yes, read it if you haven't. But it is difficult to implement, and the reason why it's difficult, I would argue, it's that because it's not because of technology reasons, mostly because of it's such a mind shift and so many things that need to change on how you do it and how you handle data. So that's why, and to change an organization, it's hard. It's really hard. Especially large organizations that need this the most. So, but I'm not going to dig into how you can overcome those obstacles, because that's a different presentation. But we will more talk about, okay, how does data mesh work? Okay, so next one. So what needs to be in place when you talk about data mesh? For those of you who have worked with data mesh, you're probably familiar with it. But if you're not, then so domain ownership, that's pretty much what I said. You still have the sales, marketing, production, whatever you define as your domains, and they own their data, and they also own their data products. So it's not owned by IT. And then you also create a self-service data platform, and that's something that the platform is supposed to make it really easy to build the data product, pretty much. So that's their job. And then you talk about data as product. And here you pretty much apply product management on top of data. And I mean, product management has been around for a long time, but it hasn't really been used in data before. So that's more like, so it's you're supposed to care about your customers. You're supposed to be customer focused and know what your customer wants, and then you give it to them. In short, and then it's the federated computational governance where I work the most. And all of them are connected to each other. If you want to call it data mesh, I would say that then you kind of have to implement them. But I've also seen examples where you only implement one or two of them, and it definitely gives value then as well. So that was a little bit about data mesh, really short. But then I also want to give like, okay, but what are we talking about when we talk about data governance? Why are we talking about data governance? What's the target? What are we trying to achieve? So the first thing I would say is that you want to enforce security and ethical and compliance standard. You want to make sure that you follow the law. And then the second part is you want to establish accountability, making sure you get quality data that is available and accessible. And then The third thing is that you also want to make sure that data is discoverable and understandable. So these are the targets that data governance has. And if you look at, okay, but data governance, how do we do that? And it can be done in many different ways. And I mean, data governance has been around since the 70s, I think, somewhere. So it's not new in data mesh. Definitely not. But it's so it's been going on for some time. So the different approaches that you can have is that what I call a system governance is pretty much no governance. I would argue that you still do governance, but in a very unorganized way. But it's more like every system owns their data. They're trying to own it, even though they got it from this other system, and they don't really know how to handle it. They don't know how to fix like the source problems. But you know that's you just kind of handle it. And then you have the centralized approach, which is more about, okay, you have a central team setting guardrails and guidelines, and then you tell everyone, okay, now you have to do this. And then you have the federated governance, which is more like you pretty much get all the domains together, and then you decide together what, how you're going to do things, like what should be implemented and what should not be implemented. And then you have federated computational governance, which is what they talk about in data mesh. And that's like, it's the same as federated, but you also make sure you automate the decisions made through the platform. So that's how the journey works. So if we talk about federated computational governance, what's important? I mean, here you can see all the domains, they get together and they make the decisions, and then it's automated through the platform. But what's important here is that you only regulate just enough to make the mesh work. And then you want to empower the domains to move as fast as possible without dependencies to others. So you want to make sure that the central one is as thin as possible. Right. So what do you talk about? Right. What kind of topics do you talk about when you get together? So these are topics that you usually focus on, which is like trustworthiness. How do you make sure that we can trust the data? You talk about data quality, data lineage, SLO, SLA, data contracts. And then we talk about interoperability. So you talk about global IDs, metadata fields, data linking, schema stability, all of those kind of stuff. And then what you also need to say together is ownership. Which are the roles that we're supposed to have? Which responsibilities should they have? So that's also something that you need to discuss. And then, of course, compliance, like security, ethical, privacy, and how do you classify your data product pretty much, or your data in general. And then the discoverability part, of course. How do you discover your data? What should be discoverable? How do you access the data, and any of those kind of topics. And the last one is, which is very specific to the mesh, is balancing the mesh. And here you talk about, let's imagine you build a really nice data mesh, and you set all the guardrails and guidelines, but you can still see that the domains are not really sharing their data. They're building them in silos, the data products. So how do you handle that? That's something that you talk about when you talk about balancing the mesh. And what we will dig into today is balancing the mesh. I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also the compliance part. But that's something that, so let's move on to the next one. Yes, right. So we will talk about the first one here, the compliance part. So let's imagine that this board together, they have decided, okay, all PII data in mesh needs to be encrypted, and the right to be forgotten must be implemented. Okay, so how do we do that? And I would say that you would follow this process. So what you first do is that you classify your data product. and then you map it to the policies that you have, and then you make sure that the platform can provide a component and that the data product uses that component, and then you monitor and check for updates. And I will go through this journey a little bit more in detail. So when we talk about classification of data, what you probably do is that you have subject matter experts setting up some kind of framework saying that, okay, first name and last name is PII data. And so you link it, so you say that, yes, this is PII data. And then the data product owner does the classification. They look at the data product and they say, oh, yes, I have first name and last name. So I would classify my data product as PII data. And where do you do this? It's usually done, I mean, either you have a classification tool, but I've also seen examples of done in Excel and in Word. And so it doesn't have to be fancy, but you have to do it somewhere. And then the actual classification, you probably do it in your data catalog or in tags or somewhere where you have your metadata around your data product. That's where you put this. And then we move on to the next one. Okay, so now we know what PII data is. Which policies do we need to follow when we have PII data? Okay, so they also do the mapping. And this is something that can be done. You can, in some cases, you can actually do this in a data catalog, or you do it in a classification tool. But then, and then the data product knows that, okay, right, these are the policies that I need to follow. So they look at it, and sometimes they get confused because usually these policies are written on a pretty high level, and it can be hard to know, okay, but how am I actually supposed to implement this? So that's why you move on to the next slide here, is that what you want to do is that you want to make it as easy as possible for the data products. So the platform developers, they turn this into code, right? So the rate to be forgotten, it becomes a component that the data product owner can just go and use. They can go and fetch it and then they use it. Or you embed it within the data product. It kind of depends on your solution here. And where do you do this? I mean, it totally depends on how you have defined your data product. So it's kind of hard to know. If you have all your data products in Snowflake, you probably do this in Snowflake. Okay. And the last part. And then you also need, of course, you need to monitor for updates, right? Because we all know bugs can appear. And when you find a bug in the encryption, or you need to change it, or the policy has changed, you need to update the component used. So you want to keep track of which data products are using which version, and then alert them saying that, okay, we have a new version, please use it. And then the data product owner can just put it into their data product. And then you end up with a map like this, something like this at least. So you can see, okay, here we have these data products, they have PII data, and you can also see which kind of version they are using. And you can also see that someone has not updated. and then maybe you know that this is it's a crucial bug that you have in this version that we're using, so you really want to make sure that they update it. And we will dig into that, how they update this, or how do you make sure that this happens, right? How do you make sure that they will update this? But I just want to go back one step or a few steps here, because I know a lot of you are probably looking at the AI Act since it's coming, right? And I would argue that this process is something that you can follow when you talk about implementing AI governance and the AI Act as well. Because what you probably need to do is that you need to classify your AI model, or first maybe you need to identify, do you even have AI? But so you probably need to set some kind of framework, and then you classify saying that, okay, yes, I have AI here, and I actually have, it's a level 2. according to the AI Act. Okay, yes, it's a level 2. And then how do you do that? Okay, which policies do I need to think about when I have a level 2? Okay, these are the policies. Great. Then I know what I need to consider. And then I would argue this is a good thing to do as well, right? Because you want to abstract the complexity as much as possible so you can build AI products as fast as possible. So you want to make sure that it's easy to build them, and so you want to provide it from a platform, so that the product owner of that AI model, you can. Sorry, I got confused by the chat. They can just use it, and then they can build their AI model. And then the same thing here. You want to monitor and check for updates. Okay, but then we dig into this problem, because it would be the same problem when you have AI models, right? It's no difference. So how do you handle this? I mean, how do you make sure that this little data product is updated? Because normally what you do is probably you write angry emails to this data product owner saying you have to update, you have to update, you have to update. And that might work, but in the long run, viewing that you have 1,000 data products, it's not very, I mean, it's not the way forward, I see it. And you can also look at so I've written the problem statement here. As a data scientist, I want to use secure and compliant data products, and I'm concerned that the data products that I use aren't compliant and secure. So in data mesh, how Shamak Degani talks about this in her book, she talks about, okay, when you balance the mesh, you should use system thinking and feedback loops. And how would that work in this case? So when you introduce these feedback loops, you want to make sure that the system is kind of happening by itself without you being involved and pointing fingers. So what you want to do is that, first of all, you want to incentivize data sharing. So you want to make sure that the data product owner has targets on usage of their data product and the customer satisfaction of their data product. So they should be incentivized to care about that they share the data. And then the second part that you want to do is probably you want to make data product owners responsible for making sure that they read from secure sources. I mean, they are responsible for their data product, but they are also responsible for reading from secure sources. What will happen then is that, I mean, okay, they're going to be a bit annoyed when they see that the data product that they're using is not secure anymore. And you also want to send out alerts to everyone around there, so they are also aware that this is happening. You're using a not secure source. And what you also want to do is that you want to make sure that you down prioritize the data product and mark it red in the discoverability tool, so that everyone can see that this is red, don't use it. And then since the data product owner wants you to use it and they care about the customers, they will probably update so that they're green again. So this is one way of thinking of feedback loops. And if you move on to the next one, I'm just going to take another example of this, because if you imagine that you build a fancy, nice mesh, but maybe you still have this problem, right? As a data scientist, I find it hard to understand what data the data products have, leading me to spend a lot of time of investigation, asking for access, cleaning, in the worst case, even using the wrong data because I thought it was another kind of data. And I've heard a number of this. I don't know if it's true. It's like the data scientists spend 80% of the time doing this and 20% of the time on what they actually want to do. So how would you solve this kind of problem in the mesh? It's kind of the same thing. You would, for sure, incentivize data sharing, by setting targets on the customer's satisfaction for that data product, so that they care about what their customers say about their data product. And the second part would be, okay, you make sure that the description field is included in the customer feedback form. Because maybe if you just set up a system saying that, yes, this is a good data product, or it's a bad data product, but the data product, they don't know how to fix it if they're called a bad data product. You want to make sure that it's very specific what's wrong so that they can do something about it. And maybe it's enough to introduce the first 2 points here. It could be enough, but it could also be that you have data product owners who really wants to change, and they're eager to change according to the customer feedback, but they don't get any feedback. And then what you probably want to do is that you also want to incentivize filling in the customer feedback for the data products. So I mean, what I imagine that you can do here is that you set targets for everyone using the data mesh, saying that, okay, maybe you have to fill in once a month or something like that. So I'm at the last page now. So what is in it for me as a data scientist? I'm done. I'm just going to summarize. So imagine a world where you can trust the data, and you can use the data, and you can join the data everywhere because you know how it's connected, and you know who to contact, and you know it's secure and compliant, and you know, and you can discover any kind of data that exists within your organization. So that's what I imagine you in this picture being very happy. So thank you.
Thank you, Karin. That was really, really, really interesting. And we have time for one question, if there is someone that wants to ask something in the chat. Otherwise, I will ask. I actually had several questions, but I will choose one, since, as I said, we only have time for one question. So, and then you talked both about, you know, the obstacles when companies try to implement data governance and data mesh, and I completely believe you when you say that that's another presentation. Please give that presentation at another time, because I would love to listen to it. And then you told us that the tools and the platforms that you use to implement this kind of rules, and you know, the federated computational governance don't really matter that much. But if you were to look at all the different, you know, tools that you have used, in your experience, I mean, for the projects where you have been involved, what would you say have been the, you know, most user-friendly tools?
When you say the tools for this part here.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Since there's so many at the market, and it's really tricky, you know, to find a good one or an optimal one.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to a tool that data governance uses a lot is, of course, a data catalog, and that's kind of crucial for data governance to happen. I would say it's still tricky because the data catalogs vendors haven't really catched up. In what they actually do. So what I've seen done is that maybe you implement or you use Elation or Colibra, but then on top of that you actually develop something by your own so that you can do this data mesh way. I think that's going to change. I mean, I am definitely seeing it changing, and they are changing. The vendors are changing, but it's still it's early days for data mesh. So the tools haven't really catched up.
You know what? I'm really happy to hear you say that, because I have worked in several different kinds of data governance tools, and exactly what you said now is what I've seen. You know, they all have advantages, absolutely, but they are not really finished, are they? But no. Once again, thank you so much, Karin.